Good. Thank you so much for being on today, Wendy. How are you doing today?
It's a pleasure on this lovely morning here in Australia.
Yes, and it's like it was like almost what was it, night or noon-ish over here. It's this connection is pretty amazing, and I like your background. It's pretty amazing. What do you have there? Like I see a lot. Like, can you tell us about that? Like your background, please.
Yeah, that's that main bookshelf. I go like that. Yep. So all the ones behind the glass case, all the ones above the cupboards are my books. Because there's quite a lot of translations. So yeah, they actually fill all that. And you can see that there's one, just a minute, I'm going the wrong way. There's one very messy one because I just got some new Chinese editions and then the new book, Swallow's Dance. So I'm going to have to rearrange the cupboards. What a tragedy.
I like your beautiful energy. I like it. Thank you so much for today. And you did one amazing things that you have accomplished. 27 publication. So, like, what was it? Language or something? Like all over the world?
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, that's just gone up to 29 because I haven't updated since Nims Island has just been translated into Russian and Romanian.
Ooh.
So, yes, 29 languages, which is it's really quite exciting, you know, when I look at it. And it's quite amazing because that's my book and I can't read it. Fascinating.
Can you introduce to yourself to the audience, please?
Yes, well, so I'm Wendy Orr, and I'm an author primarily of children's literature. I've written one adult novel, and some that are sometimes called young adult, and sometimes called middle grade, one that's always called young adult. But so my best-known book has been Nims Island. But my most recent one, Dragonfly's Song, has done quite well in Australia and Canada. It won the Prime Minister's Award in Australia last year, which was wonderful. And it's been on a couple of good lists in the States, and it's shortlisted for quite a few awards in Canada this year. So that's been very nice. And I should have actually picked it up. So I'm going to pick up my two new books. So this is Dragonfly's Song. This is the North American edition. And so it came out in 2017 in Canada and the States. And then this is Swallow's Dance, which is just out in Australia, and it comes out on the 1st of October in Canada and the States. So it'll be a nice hardback like this as well in the States because yeah, they do hardbacks. In Australia, we tend not to. And this is my old faithful Nims Island, who is actually, the book itself is 18 years old. But the movie is 10 years old, so that's kind of what people think of.
I really love the cover, and thank you so much for like being on. It's very difficult to get authors that write for children, right? It's because they're usually either shy or But thank you so much for being on, and thank you for sharing that. And we'll talk more deep into that. And your book, what was it, Nims Island, become a film? How did you feel about that? Like what that brings the film?
Well, it's actually quite a nice story because I just got an email one day from someone who said, I'm a film producer living in Los Angeles, and I got your book out of the library to read to my son. And she started reading it to him. Just excuse the dogs. And she started reading it to him, and then she said her her daughter, who was 11 at the time, came in, and then her husband, who she said, and he's from Canada. I was born in Canada, and he's a film producer too. And then the two fat cats came in, and so what she did was she painted this beautiful picture of a family together with a story. And so, of course, when she said, now, please know I'm asking for the film rights, I just thought, well, she's just this beautiful person who gets my book and will do a beautiful job. And that actually turned out to be entirely true. So I was very, very lucky, because there were actually a couple of other letters shortly after that. And they just said, we'd like to know if the film rights for Nims Island are available. They didn't say, we love your book. They didn't say, we've read your book. They just said, it was because it was on a best books list in Los Angeles, sort of, just, can we have the film rights? And I don't believe they would have ever made a film. And if they did, they wouldn't have got it in the same way. So I worked on the film with her on the pitch, and then I actually worked on the first two drafts of the screenplay with Paula Mazier, the producer, and Joe Kwong, the other screenwriter. And then, of course, as is the way with films, other people took over. But Paula remained the producer. And it was just the loveliest experience. And I haven't heard many people say that. But I was just so lucky. It was a beautiful experience. And I, was invited on set. And I just had the loveliest time. And when I saw the film, I was so moved. I actually just, all right. First time I saw it, I was so moved. I cried so much. I don't know if I actually saw the film. I just saw this blur. But every time I've seen it, and in that season, I guess I saw it 8 times in various places, and it just felt like, it felt a bit like seeing an old family photo that I hadn't seen before for some reason, as if there was a photograph of your family of when you were maybe 10, and you just never happened to see this picture before. And it was a picture that was really beautiful and captured your family. And it was that sort of feeling. So it totally got the feeling of the book. And the second film, Return to Nims Island, which deviated a lot more from the plot of the book, because the book Nim at Sea would have been a horrendously expensive film to make. But it got the emotion. It was very much, this is Nim. And when I read the final draft of that one, of the screenplay, I actually wrote to the screenwriters and said, all right, this isn't sort of the story that I wrote, but it's so much a story that I could have written for Nim. And again, when I saw it, I just thought, this is lovely. It's so Nim. Yeah, it's not the details that I wrote, but it just captured my girl and, let her set free into this wider world, which if I don't believe books are like children. I have children, and I now have 2 baby grandchildren. And I feel quite strongly that books are not as important as real people, but they are very, very important to me. And so using that analogy, when your book is published, it's a bit like your child leaving home, going to university, and they have to stand on their own. And all you can do is kind of send them love from the sidelines, but you can't make people like them. You can't make people give them a job, like getting a movie. And so it's wonderful when they actually go out and reach other people. So yeah, it's just an amazing experience.
As you were telling me that, I was like, wow, your creation has come alive. Like what you thought about, or you created the story in the book, and it become live. And That's pretty interesting experience. I always want to like to be able to take my imagination to turn into live action. That's cool. Well, thank you so much for that. I enjoy that. Thank you. When you were creating Men's Island, what was what? How did you create it? Like, did you like? What was the creative ideas that put into the story, and why did you create it? And what was you trying to like to convey to the readers?
That makes me sound much more organized than I am. I tend not to have this sort of like, I know I'm going to write a book about this. I end up with a story that's kind of there, and I got to work it out. During the later drafts, I sometimes realize like the theme about why I need to work it out. But at the first part is the story. But Men's Island actually started back when I was 8. And we were living on the Canadian prairies then. And so we had gone out to British Columbia on the west coast of Canada for the holidays, and we're visiting my grandparents on Vancouver Island. And so we were on a ferry. We went past this little tiny rock of an island. And I thought, I'd love to run away and live on an island. And so when we went back to the prairies, you know, miles and miles from the sea, I started writing this story about a little girl who runs away from an orphanage, because I was reading Anne of Green Gables, and everything you read, well, anything you love that you read, you know, gets laid down. And so my little girl was an orphan because Anne of Green Gables was an orphan. And so she ran away from her orphanage to live on an island. And because I was very squeamish about things like killing fish, there was also a boy who ran away from his orphanage to the same island, and he was better at killing the fish. And basically I wrote this story for about a year, and then I got bored with it and got more into horses. And so the kids got adopted and got horses. And which is, you know, not a good ending for a book that was about that. So then years later, I had probably about 10 books out, I think. And it actually started with this thing where I'd won Book of the Year for children's books in Australia the year before. And so there were a lot of children writing to me. And one week I had 2 little girls write to me, basically the same letter, and I don't think they even really said anything except, could you please write a book about me? And I started kind of playing with this, you know. I mean, I just wrote back and said, look, I'm sorry, that's not how I work, but you could write a book about you, you know, trying to be nice. But I started playing with that sort of what if, which is, you know, the author's stock tool. Well, what if the author wasn't as nice as me? And then what if the author's this really famous author? And so I started playing with this girl writing to an author, and the author said, well, I couldn't write a story about you because, you know, I'm this very famous adventure writer, which immediately leads to the question, but what if the girl's life is more interesting than the author's? Because as we know, authors kind of sit in their messy offices and write. And so I started playing with this, and of course for me, because of this childhood game and story, it went immediately to, well, obviously the little girl lives on an island. And it was probably took me about a year of playing around with that to sort of work it out. And originally she was going to send messages by seagulls. I never worked out why the author went on writing to her at this stage if she wasn't going to be nice. And then, you know, the author changed and actually was nice. But it started with seagulls, and there were lots of problems with that. And then a friend said, well, what about email? And so this was in 1999. So that was actually the first book that I used. Didn't have Google then, but, you know, that I used the internet to actually do some research. But the research was still mostly pictures from National Geographic. found out that you could get satellite dishes for boats that would, work out at sea. And I thought, well, if they work in the middle of the Pacific, they'll work on an island too. And so I decided she could have email. And so that was the sort of genesis of the story. But later it struck me, much later, because I'm very dim about things that actually pertain to me. When I wrote it, we were actually on the equivalent of the Australian prairies, miles from the sea. And I've always really loved the sea and mountains. And so once again, living on very flat, dry lands. But I was actually quite heavily disabled at the time, and I'd broken my neck and a whole lot of other bones. And so I couldn't walk, actually, because I'd broken my ankles. And anyway, the variety of the combination of all the things I'd broken and damaged meant that for several years I couldn't walk. And so I think that was probably also a factor in creating this very capable, resourceful girl. I think that was probably more than just the fact that I missed the sea. Because when I was reading the first page aloud to a class one day, and it finishes, the bit that I finished with said, Nim waves her dad out of sight, and for 3 days and 3 nights, whatever happened or needed doing, Nim would do it. And I thought, you know what? I think that's what the book's about. It was only about 15 years after I'd written it, And I thought it's about being able to be someone who can just do stuff. Nim has a lot of flaws. She's hot-tempered, she's impetuous, she's a kid, and she is resourceful and strong, and she does what needs doing. She doesn't think of herself as brave, but like most of us, she's incredibly brave when she needs to be. And kids write and say, I could never be as brave as Nim. And I will say, you would be if you had to be. Just most of us are lucky enough we maybe don't find out how brave we need to be. But so I think that maybe had a bit to do with the fact that when I wrote it, I felt like a person who couldn't do anything because I couldn't really leave my house unassisted. And so this only struck me very, very recently that probably was quite a factor in why I chose to go back to that particular story that I wrote as a child. And so, yeah, I think those are the general inspirations for it.
That's very beautiful. During your hard time, I'm sorry about that. That's not easy. Like, how did you get through those dark time while trying to create a story?
I think I was lucky that I was a writer before I broke my neck. And I know that the sort of more popular story is that I started writing because I broke my neck. But actually, I did have quite a few. I think I only had 3 books published, but I actually had quite a lot contracted. And I'd started one story the day that I had the car accident, or the day before. And so it was like I had something to work on and think about when I was well enough to sort of start thinking. And I think that really, really helped. And they were pretty rough years, but I think one thing, I had young children, and one thing that was very powerful for me was that my son was in the passenger seat. And I used to think, imagine how much worse it would have been for a 12-year-old boy to be told he'd never be able to walk properly again. And, for him to go through this, that just would have been so much worse. And so that was helpful. But when people, have asked why Dragonfly Song is quite a dark book with a girl that's very abused by the society she lives in, and I thought, yeah, actually, I think that although I wrote Peeling the Onion, which was about a 17-year-old girl basically having my accident, and even though people think it goes fairly deep, it still didn't really go that deep. And I think Dragonfly Song was where I went deep into my feelings about it and actually finally got rid of most of them. And as you can see, I actually have learned to walk again. I've been really, really lucky with finding some amazing therapists at the right time. But they were pretty dark years. But as I say, people get through things. I mean, it's amazing what people get through. And I used to wish that I never quite had the nerve to ask the surgeon, but I used to fantasize about having my most painful foot amputated. But I always knew that while the foot was there was hope that one day it would work. And I think I'm a great believer in the power of hope and faith, not so much in a religious way, but just faith in ourselves and, I don't know, the universe, that things can improve. And so, yeah, I think that's what got me through. And as I say,
That's really inspiring.
Got me walking again.
That's very inspiring. Thank you. Like I when you spoke, like I think that in this interview, that's why I do these type of interviews, to be able to inspire people, to be able to touch people's heart that there is a better way. There's, like you said, hope, because in this day and age we don't have much. We have a lot of chaos and darkness and what was it? The news. I really don't like the news, the way that they portray negative, but that's very powerful. And second, the reason why I also do interviews is because the educational system. I believe that when I was a kid, I was labeled as special education, and I thought I was dumb. But I wish the education can be improved. As you, for you, when you were growing up in the educational system, what did you saw? Did you like? Were you the what was it? Valedictorian of your days?
Well, I don't really scattered education because my dad was Air Force. So we moved to France from Canada when I was 3. And my parents thought that we should make, the most out of this opportunity. But we actually lived on the Canadian Air Force base because they wanted to move into the village, but they got some regulations wrong and they had to stay on the base. And so they actually put me in a taxi and sent me off to nursery school in the village at 3. And okay, I didn't speak a word of French. And this was actually a disaster. And I can remember standing in the corner and crying because someone had said I was talking, and I can remember thinking, but I can't even talk. How could I be the one who was talking? Now I think, why would you put 3-year-olds in the corner for talking at nursery school? But anyway, apart from that, and I really respect my parents that they actually put the child before their ideals, and they pulled me out of that nursery school, let me go to the one on base with the other little Canadian English-speaking children. Then we moved to another village where we moved straight into the village life. And I went to kindergarten and still didn't speak a word of French. Remember my father teaching me knife, spoon, and fork, which was so useful, as you can imagine, on the first day of kindergarten. But I met a little girl there in the sandbox on that first day when my mother registered me, and she took me under her wing, and we're actually still friends. So some years later. And so I started school in France. So that was sort of, a bit of a struggle learning to speak French as I learned to read and write. Then when I was nearly 7, we moved back to Canada. And I was kind of once again a migrant because English was the language we spoke at home, but I'd never spoken it to children outside, like maybe a visitor to the house. So I never heard slang. I'd never heard swearing. I couldn't distinguish between the two of them, which caused all sorts of problems when I tried to, fit in by using the new words I'd heard. And I, of course, had to learn to read and write in English, which, the reading came really easily. The spelling was harder because of, and there's some words that I still spell wrong because I hear them in the sort of French way, even though I'm no longer fluent. And so I had a sort of, sketchy education. And I think the other thing was I was fairly good at school, but I can also remember realizing that if you came into a class, you did not want to be the top of the class. You were not going to make friends that way. And I can remember really thinking that. And then in high school, in grade 12, suddenly thinking, oh, hang on, maybe I should have worked harder. And throwing a bit of effort in those last 3 months or so of school, and actually, and I can remember, I don't think I've ever told the story in public before. I don't know if I've told anyone before. I can remember at the actual graduation, and there was an honor thing for everybody who got us, over 80%. And so for that last term, I'd made 87%. And they sort of called the names, and I'm waiting, and there's my best friend, and there's our other 2 friends. And that's it. Because the fact that I hadn't actually done much work for the first 6 months meant that my average was under the 80. And so that was a really good lesson in life. Sometimes you have to actually work hard and do things, not just say, oh, hang on, maybe it's time now. So I don't think anybody ever thought I was a genius or anything. Teachers did encourage me in writing. I can remember one teacher in grade 9. I can remember by which town we lived in, and telling my parents, to give me more poetry to help the rhythm of my language, because, and looking back at that, she obviously felt that I had something that I should carry on with. Although I have no particular memory of what it was that I wrote in grade 9. I just remember the discussion with my parents after the parent-teacher interview. So she must have seen something, but it was like grade 9 was, in Toronto, and then, then we moved across the country again, and grade 7 and 8 had been in the States. And so there was, I had a lot of different school systems. In grade 2, which was in 3 schools, 2 languages, but and we had like 3 different systems of learning to write, your actual penmanship. I've always blamed that for my illegible handwriting, except that my son's is just the same, and he went to 1 primary school right through, so it might just be us.
Thank you so much for that. I was thinking about a lot of things. Like, is that's where your path becoming a writer begins? Because I was thinking, like, you will be the one to read a lot, right? Because
Yes.
The thing that I often told on my YouTube channel or video is that some people would, in school, they would be forcing you to read, and you don't want to read. But I love reading because it changed my life to a different path. But I remember I used to read like lots of novels, like Star Wars. But for you, is that what type of books that actually influence you to create stories like that?
We read a lot of, sort of classics, and because I do think that books that I've loved just for the feeling of the language have probably influenced me a lot. And as I said, I mean, Anne of Green Gables, ones like that where the heroine wants to be a writer, of course, really spoke to me. And I love that Anne of Green Gables had been my grandmother's favorite book, and she gave it to me. And so there was that sort of emotional component with that one too. But as I grew older, by the time I was about 12, I guess, I started reading Rosemary Sutcliffe, who wrote historical fiction. And because my desk is so messy, this is one from a talk that I gave in February that's still out on my desk. And this is one of Rosemary Sutcliffe's, The Eagle of the Ninth. And I was on a panel for the book that changed my life. And I chose that one because although I really knew from the time I learned to read and write in English that I wanted to be a writer, it was this book that I think showed me that a writer has to work, that it's not just about having these stories, in your head and then they magically get out onto the paper, but that there's work behind it, and for this, of course, actual research. But all books, you need some research. I mean, Nim's Island, I still did research, even though it appears to be a fantasy. I found out a lot about shells and coconuts and reefs and tidal currents and, that sort of thing. But when I read Rosemary Sutcliffe, I just threw myself into writing history of Roman Britain. And we were living, at that stage we were living in Colorado near the Air Force Academy. So my dad was still in the military there. And so I would get my mom to take me to the Air Force Academy library, and I made notes on Roman military history from the library there. And I think that sort of laid the bones for understanding, as I say, that there is work. You have to have logic in your world. And so when I wrote Dragonfly's Song, which despite always thinking I would grow up to write Roman Britain, I ended up in Crete somehow. And I did a huge amount of research for Dragonfly's Song, and then was actually lucky enough to get a grant to go to Crete and Santorini to write Swallow's Dance. I didn't stay there for the 2 years of writing. I got a grant to go there for a couple of weeks and do the research, which was, it's just like fulfillment of a lifelong dream to do that. And so I think I have to thank Rosemary Sutcliffe for it back then. And then I also read Mary Renault, who I think was writing for adults, but now probably would be seen more as a young adult writer. But again, this sort of deep history, and she wrote about Minoan Crete. And I didn't remember how much I had remembered and internalized until I read one of hers again, partway through the writing of Dragonfly Song. And I thought, again, things that you read really go in deep. They become part of you. I mean, if you like them. But I always say to kids, if you don't like what you're reading, unless you have to finish it for school, don't finish it, because there's so many good books in the world. You'll find one that does touch you and go in deep. So don't stick with the one that your friend liked, but that you just don't care about.
That is beautiful. Yes, that is beautiful. I was thinking like a lot of as you were like there are some books that give you like really that emotional memories that you can go back and read again. And
Mm.
I was thinking about what made you wanted to create a children's book.
Well, I mean, when I started writing, I made a commitment. Because of course, when I got through high school, I thought, you can't really be a writer. This is crazy stuff. And, you know, you need like a grown-up job. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But anyway, I ended up studying occupational therapy. And so I worked as an occupational therapist, and which I loved. And I was crossing the street at lunch one day with a friend, another occupational therapist, and she said, "Did I tell you I've written a book?" And for some reason, I thought it was going to be some really, you know, like the study of the hand and rehabilitation of the hand or something. But it was actually a Mills and Boon. And she didn't actually get it published, but she got close. And I thought, I've always said I was going to do that. When am I going to do it? And so I was actually doing another course at the time, and I finished that off. I sent my last assignment on Christmas Eve, and we went away for Christmas, and came back on New Year's Day. I started writing, and I didn't know what I wanted to write. I just started playing with all sorts of things, and I did write one sort of children's novel during that time, which was very dated. It was very much something from my childhood, and it was very much written for my children, who were 4 and 6 or something like that at the time. And later, when I got published, the kids and I all agreed we should never have that. I should never go back and revise that. It was just ours. But at that stage, because they were younger, I hadn't read a lot of modern, sort of middle grade literature. And then at the end of that year, there was a competition for a picture book text with Scholastic. And I thought, oh, I can do that. Because I never thought about picture books, because like a lot of people who haven't started writing, I thought I would have to do the pictures, or at least, like work with an illustrator. So I just hadn't thought about it. But I mean, I was still reading picture books to my daughter. So she was actually still 3 during this year. She turned 4 during that year. And I was reading picture books at work with the children that I worked with. So I just had like this whole huge library of picture books in my head with their rhythm. And I don't think I even knew that they were 32 pages. I don't think I knew any of the stuff that you sort of have to know before you write a picture book. And so I just wrote this picture book and sent it off, and they said nobody was good enough to win this year. However, yours is good enough to publish if you'll change the last line. So you're the sort of like the joint non-winner. It was the most terrible letter. Why they did it like that, I have no idea. But in fact, my husband opened the mail because I was at work, and he was so angry at the start of the letter, he screwed it up, and then he sort of looked, and then it says, "So, we are making you an offer to publish." What? My neighbor told me that he'd driven right down the driveway on his tractor, right up her driveway on the tractor, so about a mile between the two houses, waving his arms, saying, "Wendy's getting a book published." So, although when your first book comes out, there are not trumpets and fanfare in the streets, as I thought. You just get your one little book in the mail, and they say, "We hope you're happy with it." And then they send you a few more author copies, and your friends throw you a party. But I thought, okay, so I can do this. And so although I was still playing with adult novels, one of which I actually worked back into Dragonfly Song 30 years later, I thought if I want to do this, if I want to go being published, I can go on in this genre. And so I started working with children's books, and then I realized I love them because you can, I think especially like a middle grade book, you can have a lot of fun and you can actually touch some quite deep topics. And I know that sometimes some people find some of mine overly deep. But you can touch deep things because kids think about deep things, but you can have fun with it. And you can still have fun with the language and just kind of play with language. I don't do it in every book, but you can experiment and play and create. You create a world. And I mean, it's just so much fun. I mean, so it's sort of like reading a book, except it's harder and takes longer. But it's the same joy of being in that world. And so the world is very real to me. It stays in my head for years, and it's hard to say goodbye to them. It's quite hard to say goodbye to the characters, and I realize that, you know, like with a longer novel, if it's a little picture book, that's you don't have an in-depth relationship with the character in the same way. But with one of the novels, this is almost like a grieving to say goodbye to them, and you know, just because they're not going to be part of your life anymore. And so I think it's that total immersion in the story that I love. And I just think, I know lots of people do that with adult novels too, but obviously for me somehow it's worked out that that's where they are. I kind of write the stories and I don't know what they're going to be called. And I read a review yesterday, one of my Dragonfly song, the reviewer said, well, it's very difficult to review this because I'm not sure if it's middle grade or young adult. And I thought, why does that matter? It's a story, and it's, you know, it can be read by people who are 10 if they're good readers, and it can be read by 14-year-olds, and I've had a lot of adult readers. But I try not to worry about the labels, you know, until my editor says something like, well, this is going to be children's, so you can't say that. You know, we'll have to just rein that back a little bit, because not in terms of censorship, but in terms of what you want kids to deal with and how much you want them to deal with in a story at any one time. And so just thinking about, you know, with kids approaching puberty, you don't want to lay too much on them at one time. And so, you know, I balance it in the later drafts. But I just love being in that world and finding out what happens in that world. And then when I think I've written sort of all my soul and everything, it turns out I must actually be 11, because this is where the books apparently all are. So that must be it. I must be stuck at an 11, 12-year-old kid age. So I just keep creating their worlds.
That's beautiful. And for your Dragonfly song, you said, can you talk about a little bit more about, you said what the story was, what was it, punished by society? What do you mean, can you go in deep by that? What do you mean by that?
It's a Bronze Age story. It takes place in about 1470 BCE. And she is born to the priestess of a small island. And she has an extra thumb. And extra thumbs actually are not really like a whole extra thumb. They're just usually just like a little more than a skin tag, but a little kind of floppy thing. They don't usually have a bone, just this little bit of flesh, and it's usually kind of across from the other thumb. As I said, you have to do research in all sorts of strange things. I wanted her to have a disability that was not actually a disability, but was seen as that. And in fact, when I first saw the girl in my head, she had a very twisted mouth. And I thought that's not a one that I can describe easily. It's not going to make her appealing. And so I decided on this little extra thumb. But her mother rejected her. I'll read you the first little verse, and then I'll explain sort of why. In her dreams, Asa feels memory, before thought or words, when she is still soft and small and warm in her mother's arms. A dada face leans, squeezing her arms tight, a flash of silver, pain, blood dripping from her hands, and the dada face dripping tears. And so her father, actually, to try and save her life, cuts off her little thumbs. And her father is killed. I'm sorry, my mobile has run and the dogs are objecting. But the mother, the priestess, can't have an imperfect child, and so she sends her off in a traditional hero story format. She sends the child to be killed. The old nurse saves her, takes her to a foster family where she is loved and cared for. But they are taken by raiders, and she ends up sort of in her mother's town. By then she's mute, because when the foster mother hides her from the raiders, she says, "Don't make a sound, still as stone till I come back." She never comes back, so the child never speaks again. And so nobody knows about the thumbs now. They're totally irrelevant, but she's mute. And so she's just this sort of underprivileged slave class who, a mute child in that, and she's bullied. But it does get better by the end. So, and what I used in that was something that I'd written as an adult novel that wasn't published in my first few years of experimenting. And I was looking at the society in Crete with the bull leapers. And so I was kind of marrying the myth of Theseus, who went off to Crete as part of the tribute youth to be eaten by the Minotaur, and then was given a sword and a ball of string by Ariadne and slew the Minotaur, and he and the other youths all get out. When they excavated the palace of Knossos, it's around 1910, and found this fresco of bull leapers, of teenagers leaping over the backs of bulls. And there are many, many images of them, and there are also images in Israel. And I don't think I was the first person to think this, but you have to think, what if that myth of Theseus fighting a bull-headed man is actually about perhaps tribute youth being trained as bull leapers, bull dancers. It would have been a very short-lived occupation. I don't think it would have been far off sacrifice. But I just started thinking, what if you actually survived it? Because we know from the frescoes that the palace, everyone came to watch this. What a rock star you'd be. And now it's interesting, I sort of worked the story out of my head, and then I was on the plane and I read The Hunger Games for the first time, and I thought, oh, bleep bleep here. You know, somebody's just used this myth too, and I actually was telling my friends, film producers, about what I was about to work on, and I said, that sounds a lot like the Hunger Games. And I said, yeah, I think I'll have to do it a bit differently. And so, in fact, although they kind of aim at that rock star, it gives them freedom, not a rock star. But that's the sort of thing behind it. Oh dear, my dog's got very anxious about the unanswered phone. He's very brave. So I just kind of played with all those things, but I guess there was very much the bullying about being different. And I guess it's something that I've always felt strongly about. I guess that's probably partly why I did occupational therapy, pediatric occupational therapy. And I think in my years, when I was in a wheelchair for a while and then walked with a stick for several years, it's amazing the change in people's attitude to you. You know, not being able to buy makeup at those makeup counters where in big department stores where the ladies would sort of pounce on you, you know, where a year before they'd have pounced on me and offered me a facial if I, you know, and standing there not being able to buy makeup. They did not want a person who looked like me actually buying makeup from their counter. You know, people just, because I couldn't stand up straight in a queue and I'd have to lean on something at the side, people looking at me and just jumping in front of me. And I mean, lots of people were very kind, but it just made you very aware of how we see differences and how we do not like differences. And so I think that, again, I think that all, you know, went into the background for the bullying. And just, I must say that bullying in schools and something is just something that I feel quite passionate about. And I actually ended up taking a child to school briefly when their parents moved, and she was very, very angry because I went to the school and complained about the bullying she was getting. And I said, I knew it was happening. It was my duty. And if I had just walked past the school and seen you being dragged around by your collar on the ground, I don't care if I'd never met you, I would have gone in and complained. And that sort of settled her down. But so I think it is something that I just feel strong about. I wasn't really ever bullied myself at school. I didn't experience anything like this until I became disabled at 37, when I should have been sort of, you know, at my self-confident peak. So I think that's probably it.
Thank you. That story kind of touched me a little bit because, you know, I was going back in my memories. I was actually bullied when I was a kid. That's why I didn't have like really good experience at school, I guess, because people would make fun of me if I, you know, spelled this English word wrong. I remember back in high school, there was a kid. At that time, I grew. I become a class clown because I knew that I can make people funny. I mean, you know, laugh. But I was really having a tough time during because we, like yourself, we have to. My family always have to, like, you know, move into different houses, and I felt like oh, we're moving, keep moving, and we never stayed, and I wanted to stay. But I remember there was an instant where I wouldn't, because I felt bullying before, and you know, I guess growing up, I lived in like a town where when I was a kid, we were new at the neighborhood, and you know, people were throwing rock at us, and they were calling us like names, and it was really horrible. And so back when, because you know, I'm also somewhat a martial artist. I believe that you should use martial arts to protect people, or you know, at least your family, right? So I remember back in high school there was a kid. I don't know him, but I know his name, you know. And there was like a bunch of people coming at him. I did not know why I did that, but I was like, you know what? I felt bullied before, so I go up to the crowd and I just stood there. It was I didn't know why I did that, but there was people shouting at me, and the kid was at least he was all right. And then there was teacher coming, so that's. But I know. Thank you.
That's a very powerful story.
I didn't. I remember back. Uh, but your story is more powerful because I think that it gives a lot of people hope because you didn't believe that you could become a writer. All through the story, like it's about your story is about even though you couldn't believe it yourself, but you triumphed. You start to begin to create this momentum for yourself. Like a lot of people don't have that confidence uh, to be able to do things that because we live in a world that destroys dreams instead of building up them up instead of creating them. And so that's why I do interviews with authors to be able to shine the light through that like yourself you can do it. So back when I remember when I was a kid, I hated life actually. Uh, I remember there was an instant when we moved to another house. I didn't do anything wrong, and so I remember we got off from what was it? It was the end of the day, and it was what was it? I finished school, so we got off the bus. I remember there was this one kid. I just talked to my friend. We were walking, and so he out of nowhere he punched me. I was like, "What did I do? Right? Why you punch me?" And so I felt like, why out of nowhere? Why you gotta punch me? So I think that also kind of like put. I remember my friend's older brother picked me up to go to my mother's house. And, I know how it felt. So I hated it life back then. But thank you for sharing. It's a beautiful story that you conquer your thought that you couldn't do it, but then you become an author. And that's why I want to say thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing what you did because I'm very touched by that. But I hate hearing stories like that, but since they exist, I like that they can be shared, and it touches me that books and the stories that I write do help people share those stories too. So yes, I think obviously bullying is something that you feel fairly passionate about for, unfortunately, all too good a reason. But you obviously give a lot back now too.
For as an author, of course, I always wanted to become an author, but I was like crap. But for
No, no, no. I don't think you're crap. I don't think. Yeah, I think you may not have found what it is that you write yet, but I don't believe that you have this much emotion and that your writing is crap.
Yeah. I'm not. Well, yeah. Thank you. I mean, like, for as an author, how can you create a story and then to be able to uh, write it or to become an author? How can you like and then you publish? Is it start by like becoming like yourself? You shift that mental shift and then you start creating. Like if people want to become an author, how can they become without having that fear?
I think you're right. I think that was very important. But instead of saying to myself, as I have years, one day I'm going to write, and having stories sort of, in my head that one day I would write. When I made this commitment, I am going to write, and I am going to be published. And I know people often say I'll write when I have more time. well, we never have more time. So when I was writing, I was working 3.5 days a week as a therapist. It was an hour's drive each way. We had a farm, and so I would help my husband on the farm on weekends. And I had 2 children, you know, 8, 4, and 7. And so I didn't have a whole lot of spare time, but I really made that commitment, and I used my 1.5 days off. And I do also think we have to not kill ourselves over it. And I did actually get seriously overtired that year. And I remember my doctor saying to me, when he was prescribing steroids because my blood pressure dropped so low, he said, you know, it is possible to work yourself to death. Just sort of slow down. So, and I do say to people, you know, you can be committed to writing when you have a 1-year-old baby or something, but, you know, be realistic. You're not going to produce too much right now. Just, you know, take it, be easy on yourself. So I'm saying 2 conflicting things there, and I'm very bad at finding that balance myself. But I think we need commitment without trying to kill ourselves. I don't believe this thing, you must write every day. I think, yes, you need to practice writing, and it's insane if you think that in your life, which has to balance all these other things of outside employment and family and your own health and your social sphere. You know, you keep your friends who may need support at times, and you need their support. But I think you do need to write regularly, if not every day. I think that once you've decided that you want to be published, then you need to put that thought aside and experiment and play. I worry that a lot of people are so focused on being published that they just want to do everything right. And I think you really have to be prepared to fail. And when I wrote Dragonfly's song, I had no idea, and I suspect my publisher didn't either, whether it would do well or just be a total disaster. In fact, I thought there was a reasonable chance they wouldn't publish it because it was quite experimental, because it's written in a combination of blank verse and prose. And it's about an obscure period of history, and yes, I just thought they might reject it. But I really felt that to grow as a writer, I just had to write that story, and I had to write it that way. And if they didn't want it, I would just have to worry about that later. And so I think you do have to be prepared to fail, and yet when you get a rejection, you have to honor that grief, because it's real. And so those are the sort of like the philosophical things. And apart from that, of course, it's good if you're going to write a Mills and Boon, which I tried once, and it turned out you have to actually read them first. You know, I started very arrogant. You know, this book must be easy, so I could write it. Well, no, you can't. Not if you don't know what it is. And so, but if you're going to get a Mills and Boon type romance, there's a formula for it. You can get their guidelines. If you're going to write a picture book, even though I was lucky enough to sort of kind of internalized and get the right length without knowing it, you know, you need to know some of the formats that a picture book usually has 32 pages. And so you want to work within that. You need to know how to present work to a publisher, and, you know, make sure that you're presenting to the right publisher, and don't send your gothic horror to someone that publishes only picture books or that sort of thing. But within that, then experiment, jump into the writing. I am not sure that it's helpful, the tweeting about word counts and things for the day. If that helps you, fine. But if you get too discouraged reading other people's word counts, which are always going to be better than yours because otherwise they wouldn't bother to tweet them, then, you know, just ignore that. Just get in and have fun, because it's really important to remember your first draft is always going to be crap. And it's, you know, it's just an excuse for waste paper or delete buttons. And I do think it's best probably not to delete it completely, you know, but you can, what I sometimes do is to save that first draft, then I copy it, because the thought of staring at that totally blank screen again is too overwhelming. Then I copy it, paste it into a new document, label that draft too, and then I can play with it and chop things out. And then when I realize that I've taken out something that was absolutely beautiful in the first draft, I can go back and find out actually it wasn't as good as I thought anyway. But it's very comforting to know it's there if I've lost everything. And same when you take out this big chunk that you thought was so beautiful, but it doesn't actually fit in the story. And you just save it under this file of random bits or some title like that. And then you know it's there, and you might be able to use it one day. You probably won't. But it's nice to know it's there. And so that first draft is for playing. The second draft, you look at it, you read it as a whole, which is really, really scary. And then you start thinking, well, it's really kind of a big flaw in the middle there, where this, you know, this doesn't make sense. And sometimes I just jump in and start fiddling with it, which is a really bad thing to do. You need to really look at the structure then. And I'm very, very lucky now that, being fairly established, I go to my publisher with, it's usually not a first draft. I usually lie about that. It's what I call the first draft to my publisher. It's usually the third or fourth draft. But I take that to them, and then we do what's called a structural edit. And that's when they go, you know, they read it with me, or they read it, they make notes. Then we have a meeting. Okay, well, this is, you know, great start here. They all start with some positives, you know. Oh, yep, we love this character. It's a bit slow in the middle. And it doesn't really make sense near the end. And what about this other minor character? Do they belong, or should they be stronger? And I really never did figure out what you meant in chapter 2. So it's sort of like those big overarching things, and we make notes on that, and then I go back and I rewrite it with those notes in mind. And then this is my dog who's having a little panic attack. You can get down now. Good boy. And then I keep on rewriting, and then we sort of go back and they read it again. And that's when they say, well, sometimes they say, still think chapter 2 is a bit slow. I really didn't want quite that much information on that fascinating bit of research you did. And I go grumble, 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 and think, yeah, you're probably right. But it's mostly on, you know, this paragraph isn't working. You've got the same rhythm of sentences, 3 sentences in a row. I don't think this is exactly what you meant here. And so you're going over a sort of line by line edit and the words. And then, of course, there's a final proofreading, and that copy editor comes in with a few more questions. And they tend to be very, very rigid. So if I'm using a lot of nonsense language, as I haven't done some younger ones, you know, remember the editor saying once, I don't know how the copy editor is going to cope with this, you know, because I do spoonerisms. So they come in, and they tend to be very good at suddenly noticing that, you know, you've got 2 Sundays in a row, or, you know, that sort of thing, which the editor who's been involved with the story from the start can miss things like that with me, or we remember something that actually decided to take out. And so the copy editor will come in with a fresh eye and just say, where did this come from? Oh, yes, no, not from chapter 2, because actually you took out chapter 2. And so you need that fresh eye to come in and just help you make sense of all those little bits. Or notice that apparently all authors do this. We tend to choose one word, nothing fancy, just, I don't know, say enormous or marvelous, and just totally overuse it for one book. And you say, did you really want to use this word again? If you're using it perfect, I'm not sure that's working. You say, okay, I just didn't know. That was the word of the day, and I just used it. My editor wrote a beautiful sentence in the last one. Something like, well, in a less experienced writer, a less experienced writer wouldn't be able to get away with the length of this sentence. If you did think of revising it, I would put a full stop in here. Sometimes she just says, I have put a full stop in there, but this one she must have created a bit more fun. Yeah, of course we'll put a full stop in. I just didn't draw breath, that's all. So you need, and if you're not working with an editor, as I am now, when you're writing your first book, you need to try and do these things by yourself. And of course, some people, will join a critique group or something. And again, I think you have to be careful about those. You have to make sure you're on the same wavelength with those people. So some people find them helpful. And I have met somebody who I think her writing was quite destroyed by a critique group. So you have to be careful. My really, really big thing is once you get past the first draft, certainly by the time you get to a final draft that you're going to show anybody, you must read it aloud. And that's where you will pick up, unintentional rhyme, which can be, really terrible if you're writing some tragic sentence and you ended up with a sort of cute rhyming couplet. Sentences that are too long, overuse of a word, and sometimes I actually record it on GarageBand or something, and then I listen to the recording. So I've obviously read it myself, but then I'm listening to it, and I actually make myself lie down on the floor so that I can't get distracted, because since I've just read this over and over again, it's really easy to wander off and start tidying the desk or something. So I actually listen to my own recorded voice lying on the floor, and then of course I have to jump up when I hear that, something sounds strange. But I do think that's quite important. And for continuity within the book, I do make maps. I don't have really good spatial awareness, and so I have to make concrete maps. Sometimes I actually make models, just with salt dough or something. And so that way I can go back to it. And just making sure that, you're looking out at the sunset from the doorway. You can't look out at the sunrise from the same doorway. And it's very easy to kind of just fall into that, because the sentence, just rounded out the chapter so nicely to be looking at the sunset. And you've got to remember which way the house is facing. And so, so I'll do models of, or maps of houses themselves. If it's a book with, oops, sorry, dogs. Oh, I kicked that poor dog. And I make timelines and calendars and that sort of thing. If there's a lot of characters, I might have a note, like if they're child characters about the same age or something. There's one book I did where I had notes with like who was tallest, because that's very important to kids. And so, that sort of thing. And I don't know that it ever went into the book, but it's important to me to know in their relationships, sort of when their birthdays were, and then where their houses were in relationship to each other, all that sort of thing. It's just that continuity thing is very important.
Thank you so much for that. That's you have a lot. Like, thank you so much for the advice that for anyone to become authors. Uh, you know, in this talk, you also talk about because hope, right? I remember you talk about the universe. Can you explain about that in deeper detail? Why you say like that? Like you believe in like hope and you believe in the universe. Can you explain?
Well, I guess I'm a naturally optimistic person. My daughter-in-law said that yesterday when we were talking about the weather forecast of rain and hail for two babies' first birthdays, and the babies were both sick. And I was saying, I think they'll be better, and the weather report is often wrong. And you know what? Turns out I was right. There was no hail or rain for the 3 hours of the party, and the babies weren't sick. So I think I am just a naturally optimistic person, and I just, despite the fact there is a lot of evil in the world, and there always has been, I suspect there's actually less now than, you look at through history. People that lived through the 100 Years' War in Europe, or, many, many things like that through centuries, they had a lot of stress as well. So I guess I just find it easier to think of a world where things often do turn out right. And I think also, having worked as a therapist, I was amazed at what people do cope with. People had terrible, terrible disasters. And so when I wrote the book Peeling the Onion, and I did use my accent, one of the things I thought is, I'm not going to let her have a miracle. And by the time I wrote the book, I didn't think that I would be having any miracles. In fact, I had this amazing treatment that did get me walking just before the book was published. And one friend said, "Oh, you need to write an addendum." And no, we'll leave the book as it is. But to me, the miracle is that after people have disasters, is that they cope. And I mean, it can take a while. But people do end up surviving and coping and even having a good life, not the life they expected. Something that I didn't know at the time that I wrote Peeling the Onion is that I have a cousin that I didn't know about then. He broke his neck the same time I did. I don't know exactly how close it was, but I think within a year or so of each other. And he is a tetraplegic, so he has some movement in his arms, and can move his head, and he's lived in a wheelchair since then. And when I met him, he was driving his adapted van, and he can drive that around London. And he doesn't have the life that he thought he would have had, but he actually has quite a full life. And that was a very powerful thing for me to discover 20 years later, as a sort of testament to my belief that people do cope, and it doesn't mean we don't regret things and wish that things were different. And I've never quite managed that. The people that say, "Oh, aren't you grateful to your ex? You would have never written Peeling the Onion." Well, you know what? I'd have happily not written Peeling the Onion and not lived with pain. Absolutely fine. But I can still pull good things that happened from it without saying, yeah, that I was grateful for it happening. I can still find the good things. And I guess that's my philosophy of life. We have to pull the good things out of what happens. And so I think that's why I believe that if I believe that the universe has an emotion, which I don't think I quite believe, but that it is generally benevolent, but that it's awfully hard work in there sometimes to find that. It's very complex. I hadn't thought about that very much. I've never been asked that before, so you're a deep one.
Well, the reason why I asked that, because I do believe in miracles. I have seen miracles in my life that I never thought I. You're right, because I saw what passed when you saw people. Their life would never be the same because of that one instant that turned their life around. For instance, because I'm touched by your story, by deeply how you saw miracles. Because during the darkest time of my life, I wanted to die. I wanted to sleep because I think dreaming was better than reality. Because during 2011, I broke up with my sweetheart, and she meant the world to me. And I thought that I cursed at God. I want everything just to be gone. I questioned. I was lost. I questioned life. But during those times, I saw a new perspective. Like if it didn't change me, I wouldn't be able to interview authors, right? I
No.
wouldn't be able to change things, right? And what I do believe that the universe is quite powerful. Because oftentimes that's why I want to kind of be like Oprah, where she interview other people. But I saw an instant where people life go chaos, but after the chaos, they saw something good in it, but also they grew from it, right? And then, bam, their life changed.
Yes.
Yours and mine, because that's the beauty, right? Like, awesome. Thank you.
So, and you're right. Those are miracles, and I think I had thought it's not. I didn't believe from my character in Peeling the Onion she was going to get a miracle that snap. Okay, now your body is fine again. But yes, that miracle is changing our lives. Yeah, very much so.
Sorry. I know the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to share a lot of things that have. I mean, I didn't want to be the type of interviewer that to be able just to ask a bunch of questions. I want to be able to dig deep to connect with the author themselves because I think that asking a bunch of questions is not really connecting. I want to be able to connect with emotion, right? Because I'm actually introverted. I mean, I like to socialize, but I mean, I'm like between like extroverted, introverted, um, but for you, how do you have any fears and how you overcome it?
Oh, I have heaps of fears. I have heaps of fears. I mean, well, apart from a ridiculous fear of going to the doctor after having had so much wrong with me. But I mean, like everybody else, I have fears of failing. Every time, I mean, the fear when I put a new book out is tremendous. I mean, Swallow's Dance took me 2 years to write. Will anybody read it? I don't really know yet. That's a tremendous fear. And of course, like every human being, I have fears for my family and, will they be well? Will this neurotic dog get more neurotic? Just those normal human fears for everyone we love. And so well, actually, one thing that I do a lot of emotional freedom technique tapping, and so sort of meditate with that. And
did you say tapping? Wait, did you
tap,
say tapping? Are you into the law of attraction?
uh, the tapping.
Wait, are you talking about ET? ET. What do you mean by tapping? Can you go deeper?
When
By,
when you deal with your yes, you deal with your fears by saying, even though I'm absolutely terrified that this is going to happen, I deeply and completely accept myself. And then you just like go through these points, say, oh, I'm going to fail. Nobody's going to like my book. This book is crap. Everybody's going to hate it. And you keep on. And then after a while, I think, oh well. And you feel okay.
well, I know I have seen, because basically I'm in the non self help stuff. I'm into the self help stuff. There's the spirituality and the law of attraction. They call it. You probably heard it before. Have you heard of The Secret?
Yes.
Yes, that's where the whole, the, like you said, if the universe would have emotion, I would be able to say it could, because I've seen strange things, but I think it's based on intuition too. But I remember back in the day, 2013, where I saw a different perspective of life that I never knew, like, that could existed. So we all have that incident of coincidence in our life that touches our life and changed our path forever, and that's what happened to me. And then I go in search of YouTube. There's a lot of tapping. I did not. Um, they have tapping like for like to be successful or something like that. I mean, I saw a couple of videos on that, so I know.
Yeah, no, it just works. It works with the meridians, like acupuncture meridians. You're kind of tapping on acupressure points, and yeah, I like it.
That's so cool. That is so
This
cool.
has been an amazing interview. This has been, we have touched on a wide variety of things. You're very, very good.
Thank you. I've been. It's because like you said you didn't like filming. I didn't like filming. Back when it was last year, I wanted to do interview with authors, best-selling author, or a whole writer. It just went on to amazing. Like, but I got in between though. There was a best-selling author who helped me. He was interviewed by Oprah, and so the first time I did an interview, I made a mistake. I thought an interview would be like getting a job. But I had like two instances where because I have a property manager as friend, he told me that interview is also conversation, like back and forth. And the best-selling author guided me to do an interview, and he helped me that. So, but along the way, I got many rejection from authors because they have gatekeepers. I don't have lots of subscribers, so I didn't like that, but I keep asking. That's why I asked you for an interview. Oh yeah, what did you say yes to an interview?
Oh, well, because I'm the sort of person that tends to say yes.
Well,
I thought, why not? You asked me. You sounded pleasant, so why not?
thank you so much for that. Um, for you as an author, has success changed for you over the years? Because for me, I never, when I was growing up, I grew up growing up poor background. I didn't have really good meaning of success. So, what does success look like to you?
But one kind of sad thing, I realized that I keep raising the bar. So, I think when you have like first I want a book published. And then you think, okay, that's success. You have the book published. And think, no, I want the book to be successful now. And I want the book to sell. And I mean, to some extent, for me, success is can I make a reasonable living out of writing, which is very, very difficult just to actually make a living. Some years I do, and some years it scrapes through. But yeah, I guess it's just human nature to keep on raising the bar. You think, well, I want this book to actually do well. Dragonfly song won a lot of awards. but it's certainly not a bestseller. I think it may be a bestseller within Australian terms, which is something like 10,000 copies. So now I'd like it to actually, I'd like to be able to make a living from the 2 years I've invested in each of these last 2 books. And it is nice to receive awards and feel that that's been recognized, you know, that the effort and the dream that you put into a book. I guess that's success. And look, certainly the feeling when people write to me and say what books have meant to them, that is a huge marker of success to me. But, you know, I am being honest, and well, I need to make a living. You know, that is very much part of it. So it's the two sides of it. That emotional gratification is very, very powerful, and it really means a lot to me when people write and say how a book has helped them in some way or what it's meant to them and that sort of thing. And then, yeah, just actually the bare bones of selling the books and, you know, knowing that as well as people say nice things, they've actually invested the price of 3 cups of coffee, 2 cups of coffee, into buying something that I've spent 2 years writing. And that is, yeah, quite a tangible measure of success, you know. Can I afford to, you know, have a reasonable life writing? And so I suppose when I say that barrier raises, you know, it's sort of, well, this company published one book, I want them to publish the next one too, and of course they don't always, you know. And so that's what I mean. You kind of keep on raising the bar of, you know, you go from just, okay, I've got a published book in my hand, and I thought that, you know, I could just die happy if I had a book published. Well, no, now I actually want the book to do well. Now I can sense my body is telling me I desperately need to stand up soon. We have been chatting for some time now. It's been wonderful.
Yeah. One more question. Where can we find you online?
WendyOrr.com is my website. I try to do a newsletter and a blog, and they're very irregular because the book deadlines come first, and sometimes life does too. But yes, I do a blog, and then I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and so I'm fairly approachable through all those things. So as you know, I don't always remember to check Instagram messages, especially when I'm traveling and have limited Wi-Fi. But now I figured out how to get to them. I'm better at it.
Wow, thank you so much. You've been wonderful, and like the inspiration, the like energy that I appreciate that. Okay, guys, subscribe to my channel, like my video, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.
Bye.